Dolls had always unnerved me. Their glassy eyes and porcelain faces seemed to hold secrets. Secrets I didn't want to uncover. Little did I know that a seemingly innocent encounter with a haunted doll would turn into a nightmarish experience that would leave me shivering in fear. It was a chilly winter's evening when I received an unexpected package at my doorstep. There was no return address, and the plain cardboard box bore no markings, only a small note that read, "For you." I couldn't recall ordering anything, but curiosity got the best of me, and I brought the mysterious package inside. Carefully, I opened the box to reveal an old, tattered doll. It had frayed hair, a faded dress, and cracked porcelain skin. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary antique doll, but as I examined it more closely, I realized there was something undeniably eerie about it. The doll's eyes were not the lifeless glass orbs I expected. Instead, they were tiny screens that displayed a swirling, dark void, like miniature black holes. I shuddered and instinctively looked away, but when I returned my gaze, the eyes were back to their lifeless state. Unease gnawed at me as I picked up the doll. It was heavier than it should have been, and the porcelain felt warm to the touch. I shook my head, convinced that my imagination was playing tricks on me. After all, dolls couldn't be haunted, right? I decided to put the doll on display in my living room, thinking it would make for an interesting conversation piece. As I turned to leave the room, a faint whisper reached my ears, so soft that I almost didn't register it. "Help me," the voice pleaded, barely audible. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around to see the doll's eyes now displaying the message. Fear surged through me as I took a step closer, my hands trembling. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice quaking. The doll's eyes blinked, and another message appeared. "I'm trapped. Help me escape." I recoiled in horror, the doll's eerie messages sending shivers down my spine. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself drawn back to the doll, as if it held some dark, irresistible power over me. For days, I couldn't tear myself away from the doll. Its messages became more desperate, more haunting, as if it were pleading for salvation. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. All I could do was stare into those lifeless eyes and listen to its whispers. One evening, as I sat with the doll, its messages took a sinister turn. "If you don't help me, you'll regret it," it hissed, its tiny screens flashing with anger. Fear coursed through me, and I knew I had to get rid of the doll. I couldn't take its torment any longer. I wrapped it in a thick cloth, intending to bury it deep in the woods where it could never be found. As I drove through the dark forest, the doll's whispers grew louder, more desperate. "Don't do this," it pleaded, its voice echoing in my mind. "You'll regret it." I reached a secluded clearing and dug a shallow hole, my heart pounding with every shovel of dirt. The doll's messages grew more frantic as I lowered it into the ground and covered it with earth. For a moment, there was silence, and I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. But as I turned to leave, a voice, loud and filled with malice, pierced the stillness. "You shouldn't have done that," it spat, its words sending shockwaves through my body. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and watched in horror as the ground around the buried doll began to shake and tremble. The earth cracked, and the doll's porcelain fingers burst through the soil, clawing their way to the surface. I turned and ran, the doll's enraged screams echoing in my ears. It pursued me relentlessly, its whispers of vengeance filling my mind. I couldn't escape it, no matter how far I ran or how fast I drove. Days turned into weeks, and the doll's relentless pursuit left me a broken, sleep-deprived wreck. I couldn't escape its haunting messages, and I knew that it would never stop until it had exacted its revenge. In a last desperate bid to rid myself of the malevolent doll, I sought the help of a paranormal expert. They performed a ritual to cleanse the doll of its dark energy and trap it in a vessel that could never harm anyone again. As the ritual concluded, the doll's whispers grew fainter and fainter until they finally fell silent. The malevolent presence had been contained, and I was free from its relentless torment. To this day, I can't explain the disturbing encounter I had with the haunted doll or how it came to be in my possession. But one thing is certain: The memory of those haunting messages and the relentless pursuit that followed will forever leave me shivering in fear.
Dolls had always unsettled me. Their glassy eyes, frozen smiles, and the eerie feeling that they were silently watching had always sent shivers down my spine. But what happened one fateful night would leave me questioning the boundaries of the supernatural and the real. Blurring the line between nightmare and reality, I inherited an old Victorian house from a distant relative who had passed away. It was a beautiful, albeit slightly run-down mansion with a rich history. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural, so when I discovered that the house came with a collection of antique dolls, I was intrigued. Little did I know the terrifying secret they held. The dolls were displayed in a room at the far end of the house, a room that always seemed to be colder than the rest. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of them. Their twisted beauty held a macabre fascination. But as the days went by, I began to notice strange occurrences. At first, it was subtle, whispers in the night, the sensation of being watched, and the feeling of icy fingers brushing against my skin. I dismissed them as mere products of an overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. One night, as a storm raged outside, I decided to explore the room where the dolls were displayed. It was as if they had come to life, their glassy eyes following my every move. I approached a particularly eerie doll, a porcelain beauty with jet black hair and crimson lips. As I reached out to touch it, the lights in the room flickered and went out. Panic welled up within me, and I fumbled for my flashlight. When the beam of light finally cut through the darkness, I gasped in horror. The doll's porcelain face had contorted into a grotesque expression, its lips twisted into a sinister grin. But the most chilling detail was the message scrawled on the wall behind it, written in what looked like crimson paint. "They're waiting for you, Sarah." My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at those words, feeling an otherworldly presence pressing in on me. The dolls seemed to have moved, rearranging themselves into a circle around me. The room grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, filling my ears with incomprehensible gibberish. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me, but the whispers persisted, as if the very walls were alive with malevolent intent. I decided to spend the night at a nearby hotel, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. But sleep eluded me that night. My dreams were plagued by the dolls, their lifeless eyes now filled with malice, their porcelain bodies twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. They whispered secrets, ancient incantations, and promises of unspeakable horrors. The next day, I returned to the house, determined to rid myself of the cursed dolls once and for all. I called a paranormal expert who specialized in such cases, hoping they could provide some insight into the malevolent forces that had taken hold of my home. The expert arrived later that afternoon, a middle-aged woman with a solemn expression. She examined the dolls one by one, her fingers barely grazing their lifeless forms. Her face grew pale as she inspected the doll with the haunting message. "These dolls are conduits," she said, her voice trembling. "They were used in a dark ritual, and their spirits are bound to this place." I listened in disbelief as she explained that the message on the wall was a warning, a message from the spirits themselves. They were waiting for someone named Sarah, and it seemed that I had unwittingly become entangled in their malevolent web. The expert advised me to perform a cleansing ritual to release the spirits from their torment. With her guidance, we gathered the dolls in the room and began the ritual, chanting incantations and offering prayers to the spirits that lingered within. As we chanted, a bone-chilling wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles we had placed around the dolls. The dolls themselves seemed to come to life, their porcelain limbs contorting in unnatural ways. It was as if they were fighting to hold on to their cursed existence. But we persisted, our voices growing stronger with each incantation. And then, with a deafening shriek, the dolls shattered into 1,000 pieces, their spirits released from their porcelain prisons. The room grew still, and the malevolent presence that had haunted the house seemed to dissipate. The expert assured me that the spirits were gone, their hold on the house broken. I thanked her and watched as she left, taking the shattered remains of the dolls with her. I never saw her again, but I couldn't forget the haunting encounter I had experienced. To this day, I wonder who Sarah was and why the dolls had targeted me. I've moved away from that house, but the memory of the terrifying message and the eerie dolls still haunts my nightmares. I've learned that some secrets are best left buried.
I had always been fascinated by the paranormal, especially haunted objects. So, when I stumbled upon an old weathered doll at a garage sale one sunny afternoon, I couldn't resist the temptation to bring it home. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent purchase would lead to a disturbing encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The doll was a relic of another era, its porcelain face cracked and its once vibrant dress faded with time. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow me, and there was an unsettling aura about it that I couldn't quite shake. But I chalked it up to the doll's age and the stories I had heard about haunted objects. I placed the doll on a shelf in my bedroom, thinking it would make an interesting conversation piece. At night, I would sometimes wake to find the doll had moved, its glass eyes staring at me from a different angle. I dismissed it as my imagination and the doll's inherent creepiness. But one night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint, eerie melody coming from the doll. It sounded like an old lullaby, one that I had never heard before. My heart raced as I realized that there were no batteries or mechanisms inside the doll that could produce such a sound. Trembling, I reached for the doll and examined it carefully. There were no buttons, no switches, nothing that could explain the haunting melody. I placed the doll back on the shelf, trying to convince myself that it was just a bizarre coincidence. As the days passed, the doll's eerie behavior continued. It would move on its own, its glass eyes following me around the room. Sometimes I would find it in a different part of the house altogether, as though it had a will of its own. But what disturbed me the most was the messages it left for me. I would wake up to find tiny scraps of paper scattered around the doll, each one containing a cryptic message written in faded ink. The messages were disjointed and disturbing, like the ramblings of a madman. Turn back now. They are watching. Leave this place. I couldn't understand the meaning behind these messages, and they filled me with a growing sense of dread. Who was leaving them, and what did they want from me? One night, as I lay in bed, I heard the doll's eerie melody again, louder this time. It sounded like a mournful dirge, a melody of sorrow and despair. I followed the sound to my bedroom, where I found the doll perched on the edge of my bed. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the doll and, in a fit of terror and frustration, I hurled it across the room. It crashed against the wall, shattering into 100 pieces. The eerie melody stopped abruptly, and there was a chilling silence in the room. Relieved that it was finally over, I cleaned up the broken pieces of the doll and threw them away. I thought that by destroying the doll, I had put an end to the haunting and the cryptic messages. But I was wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the doll's melody once again, echoing through the house. My heart sank as I realized that the doll was still there, its presence as malevolent as ever. I followed the sound to the attic, where I found the doll sitting on an old trunk, intact and unharmed. Its glass eyes gleamed with an otherworldly malevolence, and I could feel its gaze piercing into my soul. The doll's voice was no longer faint or distant. It spoke directly into my mind, its words sending a shiver down my spine. "You can't escape," it whispered. "I will always be with you." Terrified and desperate for answers, I began researching the history of the doll. It didn't take long for me to uncover a dark and disturbing past. The doll had once belonged to a young girl who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her family had searched for her for years, but she was never found. It was said that the girl had a special connection with the doll, that it had been her only friend in a world filled with loneliness and despair. As I delved deeper into the doll's history, I learned of a dark ritual that had been performed by a mysterious cult. The doll had been used as a vessel to trap the girl's spirit, condemning her to an eternity of torment and anguish. I realized that the messages I had been receiving were from the girl herself, a desperate plea for help from beyond the gravey. She was trapped in the doll, unable to move on, and she wanted me to free her from her eternal prison. Desperation drove me to seek out a paranormal expert, someone who could help me break the curse and release the girl's spirit. Together, we performed a ritual to banish the malevolent entity that had been haunting me. As the ritual reached its climax, the doll's glassy eyes filled with a blinding light, and a chilling scream filled the room. It was the girl's voice, a mixture of anguish and relief, as her spirit was finally set free. The doll crumbled into dust, and the room was filled with an eerie calm. The haunting had come to an end, and the cryptic messages were no more. But the experience had left its mark on me, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in even the most innocent of objects. The girl's spirit was free, but the memory of the haunted doll's terrifying message would stay with me forever. A haunting reminder that some secrets are best left buried.
Dolls have always held a peculiar fascination for me. Their porcelain faces, glassy eyes, and eerily lifelike features have a certain unsettling charm. Little did I know that my fascination would lead me to a nightmarish encounter with a haunted doll that would leave me shivering with fear. It all began on a warm summer day when I stumbled upon a quaint antique shop nestled in the heart of a sleepy town. The shop's dusty windows showcased an array of curiosities, but one item stood out: a vintage doll with a presence so uncanny that it drew me in like a moth to a flame. The doll was an exquisite work of art, its porcelain skin flawless and its eyes as blue as the summer sky. It wore an antique lace dress, and its golden curls framed a face that was both beautiful and unsettling. I couldn't tear my gaze away, and before I knew it, I was inside the shop, clutching the doll in my hands. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with wise but weary eyes, warned me about the doll's history. It was said to be haunted, she explained, possessed by the spirit of a troubled girl who had met a tragic end. Her warning sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't resist the allure of the doll. I purchased the doll and took it home with me, its glassy ease seeming to follow my every move. I named her Elisa, and at first, our relationship was uneventful. Elisa sat on a shelf in my bedroom, an eerie but captivating presence. But as the days passed, strange things began to occur. Objects in my home would inexplicably move, and I would hear faint, childlike laughter echoing through the halls. I tried to brush off these occurrences as mere coincidences, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft, melodic tune playing from the direction of my bedroom. It was a music box melody, sweet and haunting, and it sent shivers down my spine. I followed the sound, and it led me to Eliza, who was sitting on my dresser. As I reached out to pick her up, the music stopped abruptly. Eliza's eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, and a feeling of unease washed over me. I felt as though I was being watched by unseen eyes, and I couldn't shake the sensation that Eliza was more than just a doll. Over the weeks that followed, the activity in my home escalated. I would wake in the middle of the night to find Eliza perched at the foot of my bed, her eyes fixed on me. It was as though she had a life of her own, moving when I wasn't looking. One evening, as I was getting ready to sleep, I heard a soft, plaintive whisper coming from the corner of my room. It was a child's voice, filled with sorrow and longing. I turned on the lights, but the room was empty, save for Eliza, who sat innocently on the shelf. I couldn't ignore the eerie events any longer. I decided to seek the help of a paranormal investigator, hoping to unravel the mystery surrounding Eliza. The investigator, a seasoned expert in the field, arrived at my home and immediately sensed a powerful presence emanating from the doll. As he conducted his investigation, he explained that spirits sometimes become attached to objects, unable to move on to the afterlife. Eliza, it seemed, had become a vessel for the troubled spirit of the girl she was said to represent. The investigator attempted to communicate with the spirit, using an array of tools and techniques. As he did, the room grew cold, and a sense of dread washed over me. The investigator's voice trembled as he spoke, relaying a chilling message from the spirit. The spirit, it seemed, had been seeking closure for the tragic events of her past. She had been a lonely and neglected child, her only solace found in the companionship of a doll, the very doll I now possessed. The investigator explained that the spirit wanted me to help her find peace, to uncover the truth about her untimely demise. With a heavy heart, I agreed to assist the spirit in her quest for closure. Together with the investigator, we delved into the history of the town, unearthing long-buried secrets that pointed to a dark and tragic past. As we uncovered the truth about the girl's death, the paranormal activity in my home intensified. Objects flew through the air and eerie apparitions appeared in the dead of night. It was clear that the spirit was growing increasingly desperate for resolution. In a final, chilling encounter, I found myself face to face with the spirit itself. She materialized before me, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. She reached out a spectral hand, and I could feel the weight of her pain. With the investigator's guidance, I helped the spirit find the closure she'd been seeking for so long. As she moved on to the afterlife, a sense of peace washed over me, and the paranormal activity in my home ceased. I was left with a sense of both relief and sadness, knowing that I had played a part in helping a tormented spirit find peace. Eliza, the haunted doll, remained on my shelf, her glassy eyes no longer filled with a malevolent presence. To this day, I can't explain the disturbing encounter I had with the haunted doll, or how I became entangled in the tragic story of a lonely girl's spirit. But one thing is certain: Eliza's terrifying message will forever leave me shivering with a chilling mixture of fear and empathy.